Hey, it's E.B. Moss, and this is gonna be episode 34 of Insider Interviews. But I want to tell you what's been going on a little bit and how this episode came about. So I've missed a few weeks in there. I broke the cardinal rule of publish your podcast on a regular schedule. Typically, I will publish Insider Interviews every other Thursday, but I definitely wanted to fit in a little bit of vacation time. So the last couple of episodes were a little bit more ad hoc. I promise I'm back in the saddle. But one of the sessions that I did for NatP's Content Cast, I turned into an episode. Really good insights from folks like Steve Wilson, formerly of Apple, now of QCode, and Glenn Washington of Snap Judgment. So do take a listen to episode 33. Coming up, I'll have one of those panelists in his own episode, Shaleen Desai of Warner Brothers Animation. That's going to be interesting. But for this episode, I added Nashville onto my travels and was able to go to Podcast Movement for, I think, the fifth time. And I was really flattered that they invited me to speak about improving your creative and your quality for B2B podcasts. Now, you can watch my session if you want to buy the virtual ticket to the on-demand sessions from Podcast Movement. And there were some really, really great and helpful speakers. Now, this episode was recorded very spontaneously in a booth made possible by HubSpot for us podcasters to try to record some episodes right there on the Podcast Movement floor. So I grabbed my friend Jennifer Grimson and we talked about her path to podcasting. I encourage you to listen to her really, really interesting personal story and how she's leveraging podcasting for her own business now. Jennifer Ives Grimson, we're sitting here in the HubSpot booth. We'll see how good this fancy equipment is.
Yeah.
And I met you at Podcast Movement 2 years ago, the last time it was in person.
That's right.
And now we're sitting across from each other.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's so nice.
So, the great thing is that we always talk about podcasting personalizes a brand and humanizes people, but podcasting gave me a new person in my life. You're my new friend.
Yes, and it gave me you, so I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, it's a great space, and thank you to Podcast Movement for enabling number 34 of Insider Interviews.
Wow, you already have it numbered. That's fancy.
I know.
Super fancy.
But we're here to talk a little bit about your podcast, which is called Micro Empires with Jennifer Grimson.
That's right. I should change my intro to be like that.
Jennifer was new to the podcast space when I met her a couple of years ago, and now she's like a micro empire herself with it. She interviews terrific people, and so because Insider Interviews is about media marketing and advertising, we're going to talk a little bit about her path to marketing a podcast, to launching in this space, and then, of course, her personal story, since podcasting is about the personal.
Right.
Right. Cool.
Exactly.
All right.
So the podcast is about building wealth because I believe that you can build wealth. You don't have to be wealthy to build it. You can start at any point in your life, and I'm living proof of that story.
Oh, man. But I'm not quite sure that I believe you that you can grow wealth even with not a lot of dough. So I'm looking forward to sharing your story.
So my personal story is that I lost everything twice. No home, no job, no car, no money, no place to live, and 2 children to raise. That happened to me twice. Chapter 13 bankruptcy twice. And the second time I was 41 years old, so I wasn't 25. And I realized, and I'd always been an executive, a sales executive in companies making 6 figures, that if I wanted security and to build wealth, it wasn't just going to be through one thing. I was going to have to create little pockets, which I call empires. And so that's what I did. And long story short, once I got started, I was able to create $1.4 million in income-producing assets in 4 years. The podcast came about because people kept asking me about how I'd done that. Of course, I'd kept my story a secret because I was so ashamed of it. I was terribly ashamed of it. And I think most people who share my story, which is a lot of people, are ashamed of it. But I wanted to share what I had done, but more importantly, the fact that there were tools available to anybody to start building wealth. And I felt really angry. Like, why didn't I know this? I'm a smart person. I should have known. So sharing those tools and giving real steps for anybody to take, whether it's their mindset or literally taking steps to build wealth. And so that's what I do each week with my show.
What was the first lesson that you learned in rebuilding yourself?
Well, a couple things. I think the first lesson is you don't abandon yourself, which is such a powerful thing. You think about it. I treat my friends and family better than I treat myself. I don't say things to other people that I say inside my head. And I think that's true all around. So kind of finding a way, whether you believe it or not, whether you think you deserve it or not, of believing in yourself, waking up every morning and looking at yourself and say, literally kind of, yes, I can. Because on top of everything that I had, there were lots of people surrounding me going, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I just had to put blinders on and move forward because I knew that I was smarter than people who made more money than me. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
Not to downplay what they've done, but it's not actually rocket science. It's not difficult. It might be hard. It's not difficult to understand. It might cause discomfort, which is the path I took, caused a lot of discomfort. People wouldn't want to do necessarily what I did.
Yeah. I'm getting hives thinking about the need that I have for someone like you to help me and to own not only my power, but my financial power and figure out a new way of doing things other than just paying rent.
Right.
So tell me more about the first financial lesson that you learned.
Well, the first true financial lesson that I learned was when I left my first marriage with my two kids, and they were 1 and 3 years old, and I left with nothing. And I had lived in financial chaos. I have an episode about that if anybody wants to know about that, but most folks understand what that is, where you're living terrified every single day. What I realized was I didn't need to earn a lot of money. I needed to earn a steady amount of money so that I could therefore create a budget. We all kind of hate that word budget. You can do it any way you want. But how can you plan for how you're going to live if you have no idea where the money's coming from and what it's going to be? So for me, that was really important. Like, steady income led immediately to freedom. Like, immediately I knew, and we were poor. We were dirt poor. But I knew that on Friday night I could afford a pizza, right? So that's where I started, was that, okay, I got enough money that on Fridays we can have a pizza, and that's where we're going to start. So that steady amount of income was really important to me.
And then the next lesson was when you were out on your own with two little kids, what was the first thing that you did to right yourself again?
Well, the second time that it all happened, I had to rely on my network. So when I say network, it's so important, not just business network, but I include your family in that. So when you find yourself like that, if I didn't have family, I don't know what I would have done. It's because we had to move in with my sister for 4 months. I'm sure for my sister, it was 4 months, 8 days, 4 hours, and 39 seconds. But anywho, it was about 4 months. And she took us in 1 day notice. And I started looking for a job. The benefit for me was, thank God, I do have a college degree and I did have some corporate experience. So I knew I could get a job, but it was going to take time. So that was it. That was step one, was sort of land somewhere, catch your breath. And then I call it the assess phase. You have to take stock. What do you have? What do you not have? What do you need? Before you can take the next 2 steps, which are to ask and then to act. But that was step 1, and landed a job. And step 2 was to find a place to live, which is no easy feat when you have Chapter 13 bankruptcy twice. Nobody wants to rent to you, and you're a single mom. And so I talk about how I went about doing that. None of this was easy or comfortable either. So sometimes people will tell me, I really want to build wealth, or I really want to find out a way, I hate my job. And we'll talk about what their situation is, look at their entire story, and they have tons of opportunities sitting there. And I'll say, well, you could do A, B, or C. And each one of them, they'll say, well, I know that kind of makes me get out of my comfort zone. I'm like, well, then I guess love that job. I guess you love that job then. You got to choose. You got to choose what you got to do.
Yeah. Assess, ask, act. So I want to migrate our conversation a little bit to how you have continued to reinvent. I'm not done grilling you about financial lessons. I'm going to have the doctor at the cocktail party and get some free advice here. But in terms of how it applies to our topic at hand, and this being about media marketing and advertising,
Yes.
when I met you 2 years ago, you were kind of assessing. You had just started dipping your toes into the podcast space.
Right.
You were learning everything you could. I remember that's how we met. And you just kind of picked my brain and we started a friendship from there. And then you asked.
I
asked a lot of people. And
Asked
then
a
you
lot.
acted and you built this darn podcast. So talk about your path to wanting to build a podcast and how it serves you.
Yeah. I talk about this with people all the time. When you want to make a change and you want to go into something new, you have to get in the right pool. So oftentimes we're swimming in a pool with the people we've been with all the time. You ain't never going to grow. You got to get up and you got to jump in the pool. And you're going to jump in a pool with a bunch of people that are Olympic swimmers. And you're going to be in there with your floaties on, just trying to keep your head above water. But there's two things that are going to happen. Number one, you cannot be in that environment and not learn. And number two, they're not going to let you drown. The experts are not going to let you drown.
Love it.
Period. No, and that's true about Wealthy. That's true about everybody here at Podcast Movement. People who are successful 99.9% of the time want to help. They don't want to help people who throw their advice away, however. So you got to act. So that was my 2019 podcast movement. I showed up with a business card and idea. I did not have a podcast. I wanted to get in the pool and swim around and see, is this the right medium? Is this what I could do? And I knew that my path was going to be to continue to build my own wealth, but I really wanted to help others build. And I really wanted to be able to speak about my own story, because working through that shame and talking about it is huge. And especially for women. And we face it every day. And so I knew the podcast would be a great vehicle and a great tool, but I also knew that it would help me build my own wealth in many ways, in multiple streams of income through speaking and other types of opportunities.
That's perfect. And I love the analogy to Olympic swimmers and having your floaties on. And it's so true because people want to help. It's sort of like, your sister there in the pool with you with the first home base that you needed, and then all the people surrounding you at a conference like this. So what did you learn 2 years ago, and what have you applied in terms of creating and marketing a podcast?
Well, gosh, I learned, everything. I do not have a media background, so I didn't know how to plug in the microphone. I still struggle, with that portion of it. And I've never really worried about that because that's not...
There's people for that. There's Olympic swimmers that you can call on.
Exactly right. And I'm never going to be the best at that. And what I have to offer is my experience. So that's what I wanted to focus on. What I learned was that, number one, despite the fact that there's a million podcasts, and you know this, only very few of them are actually successful. And they are work. They're not easy. And you have to commit. And you have to be really thoughtful about who you're talking to. We talked about that before we came on. Who are your listeners? Who are my listeners? And what do they need to go? I don't want anybody to listen to my show and walk away and go, well, I didn't get anything out of that.
Right.
So that's what I learned 2 years ago. I learned the hard way. I went with a small network that took me under their wing, which was great. They took over all of the broadcasting costs, et cetera, and produced a show for 6 months, which was amazing. But they could not tell me a thing about my audience. And coming from a sales background, I was just hungry. I was like, I want to know, I want to talk, I want to connect, I want to hear, I want to know. They couldn't tell me anything. So I made the decision to pull back from them and to relaunch on my own, which is what
brave.
I did a year ago. Yeah. Thank you. And you know what? It was the right decision because number one, I at least know who my listeners are. And number two, they communicate. They email, they text, they send messages on social media, they share. And I'm really humbled by the level of intimate detail that they will share with me. And I think it's because they don't feel safe doing it otherwise. Money is a conversation that people are like, oh, we're not supposed to talk about that.
Yeah.
But we all need it to survive every single day.
Yeah. And the proof is in the pudding, as they say. You've had some terrific high-profile guests on, and people do want to share because you are so personal in your anecdotes as well. You had Jordan Harbinger, one of the biggest podcast hosts out there. Who else have you spoken to?
Oh, I've had so many amazing people. I've had the folks from the Real Estate Invest Her group, which is the largest real estate network for women specifically. I've had CEOs. I've had people that are running multi-billion-dollar businesses. But I think more importantly, and to me importantly, the stories that really resonate with me, and maybe not everybody knows this, but one of my first guests, Mignon Francois, she built a cupcake empire from $5. She had no electricity on in her house. She built that, and in 5 years, created over 5 million, cupcakes all over the world, and has built this empire. Another woman built a cupcake, Gigi's Cupcakes. She started with nothing, because women don't get business loans, by the way. Put it all on a credit card, risked everything, and built a huge business. Another woman, Sherry Deutschman, high school diploma, single mom, built a business to $40 million and sold it. And they share their stories, and none of those women were able to get a loan or an investor or anything. They had to do it themselves. So they, to me, are famous. And then also the show has allowed me to go on other shows like
Insider interviews,
exactly. Bigger Pockets and Stacking Benjamins and the Real Estate Investor. And so I'm really humbled by that. And I think the voice that I have, and then I hope my listeners hear, is that what makes me different, I'm middle-aged. I'm not 25 when this happened to me. I did it alone. It's scary, being a single woman at that age, because many women end up in my circumstance, and their financial plan is, I hope I meet someone. And guess what? That doesn't work. That's not how it works.
Although you did, which we'll get to that part of the story later.
I did, but I didn't do my financial rebuilding.
So let's circle back a little bit. We know that podcasting is perfect for sharing personal stories, personal information. That's what humanizes us, and it's a terrific marketing tool for that. So it helped you, Jennifer Grimson, get your name out there and get exposure via being a guest on other shows. How else are you repurposing that content to your marketing benefit?
Yeah. So it's everywhere. It's on all of the socials. It's on my website. I've started doing live streaming, and, that's hard for anybody. In podcasting, you're talking into the ether. You're just kind of talking and hoping someone will listen. But on live, you're talking, and literally you can see no one is listening at that moment, but they will later. And so I hire people for marketing, for the very specifics of it, and I let them run with it. But the key to that for me was someone to understand me and my voice. I mean, when I talk about images and where to put it and SEO and all of that stuff. But in my opinion, it's exploded. And the way I measure that is the amount of interaction I get from the audience, because it's a lot for someone to reach out. It's a lot to even have 58 reviews on my podcast. That's hard to get. Most of them don't have more than 10. And to take the time to write what they think, and to send me an email or to reach out. So
great testament to what you've shared. So I threatened to go back to get a little bit of that free doctor at a cocktail party advice.
Yeah.
So I think that you are doing some real estate flipping, some loans. So talk about your approach to how you specifically rebuilt.
Well, the second time I rebuilt, I did so through basically house hacking. The first thing I did was to buy a house, that's all I thought I was going to do. It was a miracle that I could get a house, because nobody wanted to give me a loan. And I go into great detail about how I made that happen. And then once I was in the house, I knew that house was going to become an asset. I knew I was going to use it somehow. So I jumped in a pool. I got in the pool with real estate investors who all were speaking a language I'd never heard before. And I just put my floaties on and hoped for the best. And slowly it's like learning a language. I started to learn it and to speak it. And then in 2014, I heard about this thing called Airbnb, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was like, my ears went, whoop. I thought, okay. And I, put my house on Airbnb, and I actually met my husband shortly after, and he's like, I don't understand. You're letting people sleep on your couch? Like, do you live with your mom? What's happening? So anyway, that's what I did. And I did it through a combination of house hacking. So the first house got rolling on Airbnb. Then I discovered that I could borrow against a 401k in my job, not cash out, really important. a certain amount, pay myself back with interest. So I borrowed that money. It was $22,000, and I bought another house. How did I buy it with $22,000? Because at that point I had good credit and could buy it with 3% down. Put that on Airbnb, paid myself back, borrowed the same money, bought another house, put that on Airbnb, paid myself back, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. The same $22,000 got me 3 houses. And that's the thing. It's not rocket science. And it's available to us. But listen, it wasn't fun. Like, I moved into these houses with my dog and an air mattress. Nothing on the windows, no furniture, nothing. So, and again, my husband's like, which address are you at? The time we're dating, which address are you at tonight? Like, I don't know where you live. But I was just laser focused on, I was not going to be terrified again financially, which I think most people are.
That
in
is
trueness.
Such a great story, and I love that you gave us the specifics on it. And we only have a couple of minutes left, thanks to the HubSpot people for the loan of the room. But you did invoke the word husband a couple times.
I did.
And I think it's amazing that someone put up with you sleeping on air mattresses, and he happens to be an NHL great.
Yeah.
Can you drop names, please?
Yeah. I'm married to Stu Grimson, and he was a hockey player.
The Grim Reaper.
The Grim Reaper. We met 6 years ago. I had no idea. Number one, I don't follow sports. No idea. I mean, I heard he was a hockey player. I was like, okay, whatever. That was a long time ago. Who cares? And
he had teeth still. So
he still had. I have teeth envy. He has beautiful teeth because they've all been replaced. Believe me, I have big time chicklet envy. Yeah, we meshed, but talk about 2 alphas coming together, 2 providers for our families later in life with our own assets and melding that together. But I mean, honestly, he tolerates me to this day. He tells everybody he's not the one you need to be afraid of. It's me. But, listen, I would never have imagined. So we got married when I was 50. And I never imagined that I could have, number one, I don't like anybody and nobody likes me. So I just couldn't imagine I could find somebody, but it is possible. And I do think you do have to put yourself in that pool. And it sucks. Listen, ladies, if you're listening, I know. Dating is hard.
Yeah.
But you got to do it. You got to work that muscle, and you got to be out there and trying, or nobody has the opportunity to find you.
I guess it's like jumping in that pool, as you said. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Maybe wear a plastic suit when you jump in that pool.
Yeah.
And the floaties.
Yeah. Oh, God. Jennifer Grimson, thank you so much for joining me on Insider Interviews. Your podcast, again, is called Micro Empires.
Yes.
It's available everywhere.
Everywhere, all over the universe.
She's doing a good job marketing it. And I think that our takeaway here is that not only did Jennifer come from nothing a couple of times, but she entered the world of podcasting from nothing.
From nothing.
No insights. And she taught herself everything. And that was only 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you're ruling the world.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, in fairness, the show, since I took over, has only been a year. Mm-hmm. So, I'm ruling the world in my mind, but okay, yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was awesome. You're so great. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you got some good insider scoop from this episode of Insider Interviews with me, E.B. Moss. If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/mossappeal. And I hope you'll follow Insider Interviews on social media and let me know if you have a question or a suggestion for a next stellar guest in media, marketing, and advertising. Speaking of stellar, my theme music was composed and performed by the incomparable Grammy-winning John Clayton. If I can help you with your company's podcast, please find me at mossappeal.com. Thanks again for listening.